everyone. Thanks for joining us for the ANA eLearning Academy. Today we have Rod Gillis teaching coin collecting basics. We are recording this presentation, so if you have to step away, if you miss any part of it, you can watch it in the next week or so on our website. If you have any questions, please use either the Q&A function or the chat feature here in Zoom. The questions will come to me, and then I'll read those aloud to Rod at the end of the presentation. I will also launch a survey at the end of the presentation here in Zoom, so feel free to fill that out for us. It helps us to improve our presentations each time. I'm going to turn it over to Rod, so I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Brianna. And thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon. I greatly appreciate you spending some time out of your busy schedule with me. As Brianna mentioned, my name is Rod Gillis, and I'm the Education Director here at the American Numismatic Association. And our e-learning opportunity today is called Coin Collecting Basics. And as you can probably surmise from the title, we're not going to go into any one piece of numismatics in a tremendous amount of depth, but this is more of a sort of a survey e-learning opportunity. Just kind of to give you some ideas about things to think about as you are collecting. And then after the presentation is over, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have as best as I possibly can. So I guess a proper way to start off would be to talk about what is numismatics. And what I want to propose is I want to make a list of all the things we use as money. Actually, this list isn't all comprehensive. I'm sure if we all together thought about it, we could come up with plenty more ways. But here are some basic ways that here's some basic ways of things that we use for money. Obviously, we use coins. Coins are an important medium of exchange. Maybe not as important in our day-to-day daily lives as it has been in the past, but we still use coins a great deal. Paper money. Paper money has been around for quite some time, even back during the days of the Chinese a long time ago when they were the first to invent paper money, and they called it kite money. So paper money has been around for a very long time. Debit credit cards, probably they're one of the, if not the most popular medium of exchange. I find myself using debit and or credit cards quite frequently, especially during this time of the coronavirus, where people try to keep passing things from one to another at a minimum. Gift cards. Gift cards are quite popular, especially coming around this time of year. About people use them and love to receive them. And as a matter of fact, what's interesting about gift cards is that I know several people now who actually collect them, not so much to be used as to collect them and make it part of a collection, which I think is really neat. Checks. Checks at one time were extremely popular, and with each passing year, less and less so. A lot of people pay their bills over the phone. I still use checks, though, and I'm sure that if you don't, you know of someone who does. Tokens. Tokens have been used as money. There's a large group out there, a large following, who enjoy collecting Civil War tokens, for example. Tokens and Depression-era tokens. These were things that were used in towns where money was hard to come by, and so to keep business afloat, companies were interested in creating tokens with the idea of being able to conduct business without hard money being available. Stocks and bonds. Stocks and bonds are a part of something that not only is a store of value, but can be traded, of course. I used to work for a mutual fund company and many years ago. And at that point, we actually still had physical stocks and bonds. You can still do that, but the 99.9% of the transactions today are done electronically. And just as with tokens and with gift cards, there are people who like to collect stocks and bonds. And so that's something that you might want to consider as well. So numismatic is really a study of all of the above. And I mention this because I don't want you to get the idea that numismatics is strictly coins. No, numismatics is the study of money in all of its forms. And so that's what I wanted to show you with this particular frame. Not only are coins a medium of exchange, but coins are really a reflection of all of us. One of the things that I like to talk about with youngsters is that coins are really a reflection of our culture. If you take a look at the two coins here, one is a Tennessee state quarter, which talks about the musical heritage of Tennessee. And also we have a viewing of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. These are important parts of the United States, and so we reflect that on our money. History. Certainly, coins are a great way to study history. On the left-hand side, you see the North Carolina state quarter, and you see the Wright brothers lifting off. By the way, that picture that you see there of the Wright brothers is an extremely popular one, and it's so important because this is an actual, when a photograph was taken of an actual important moment in history, not something that happened later or before, but a shot was taken as that was going on. Very, very important. And on the right-hand side, we have ships traveling to the quadricentennial of the founding of Jamestown, and the ships coming there in Virginia, which was the Virginia state quarter. So coins definitely reflect historical perspectives. Here's that picture that I was talking to you about, of the Wright brothers lifting off. You know, that is the most copied image of a photograph in the world. It's extremely popular. Coins can reflect the artistry in our culture. On the left-hand side, we see Mount Rushmore, South Dakota. And on the right-hand side, we see Washington crossing the Delaware, which was a painting. And so the artistry behind these two things are extremely important to us. Geography. You know, with the state quarters and the other state quarters that have been developed from that time, one of the, I think, huge benefits is emphasizing geography. Here we can see the California state quarter showing the state bird, which happens to be the California condor. And on the right-hand side, we see the old man of the mountain that was in New Hampshire. It is no longer there. I was actually a teacher in New Hampshire when the old man of the mountain fell apart. What most people don't know is that it was actually held together for many years by a series of cables. And there was a family who was designated to be responsible for constructing the cables and attaching them so that the old man of the mountain didn't fall apart. And even with their best efforts, because of the constant water infiltration and then freezing, the old man of the mountain did fall apart. And I want to tell you, when I was teaching school at the time, that there were a lot of people who were extremely upset over the demise of the old man of the mountain because, you know, their father and mother had seen the old man of the mountain every day, and their parents before them, as far as you wanted to go back. And it may sound silly, but there was even guidance counselors who were available at most of the schools to not only talk to the students, but to the parents, because they were so upset of the disintegration of the old man of the mountain. So what makes money successful? Well, first of all, money must be durable. It must be something that is around for a very long time. Here you see a very famous ancient coin, and this is the Ide Mar. I call this coin a mortgage coin because if you want to buy one, you have to take out a mortgage. It's a very expensive coin. And not only is it a successful coin, but it's probably, if not the first, one of the first commemorative coins because it's celebrating a specific event. You'll see on the reverse, there is a slave cap, that a freedom cap that slaves in the Roman Empire were issued once they had earned their freedom. And on the obverse of the coin, you'll see the person who is really responsible for conspiring to kill Julius Caesar. And so what this coin is telling us is that we have killed the tyrant Caesar, who was enslaving Rome. And the two daggers are indicating that we have freed, the Brutus has freed Rome of its captor. A very important coin. Money must be easily transportable. And as you can see from this picture, this is a piece of money that has sort of failed that test significantly. What you see there is a store of money, and it's rather large, and it's not something that you could consider taking around. It's from the island of Yap in the South Pacific. And what's interesting about yapstones, which is what they're called, is that the stone used to form this store of money on the island of Yap is not native to Yap, so that they actually had to go to another island to be able to harvest the stone needed for these yapstones. So money must be easily transportable for it to be successful, and certainly this is an example of something that was not. Money must be difficult to counterfeit. And one of the very first pieces of money that was used were these cowrie shells. And one of the reasons that cowrie shells were so successful is because that they were very difficult, if not next to impossible, to counterfeit. And so that's what made them popular. What's interesting is that I get a lot of phone calls from people, and they'll say, I have a 1804 silver dollar. It's been in the family for a very, very long time. And you'll take a look at it, and obviously it's counterfeit. And you say, I'm sorry, but this coin is counterfeit. It can't be. It's been in the family a long time. And they didn't counterfeit coins that long ago. Well, the true answer is that we estimate that the very first counterfeit coin was made about 15 minutes after the very first coin. So counterfeit coins have been around for a very long time, and it's a constant struggle for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, for example, here in the United States, to stay one step ahead of counterfeiters so that our money can remain sound. Another important part about what makes money successful is that we all must have an idea of its approximate value. So here we have a $20 note. All of us need to know that a $20 note can probably buy a loaf of bread and some milk and some other small sundry items when we go to the grocery store. If there are any of us who have the idea that a $20 bill can buy a brand new automobile, we have a problem. So it's very important for us to all have a general idea to the value of the money that we use on a daily basis. Leaders on coins. Famous leaders have appeared on coins since the days of the Romans. We tend to think, sort of like everything else here in the United States, that we created the idea of having famous people, dead presidents, on our coins. And really, the idea of having famous people on our coins, famous live or real people, started during the days of the Romans. So here we have an ancient leader on a Roman coin. I want you to examine the coin, and I want you to try to think of, who is that? Who is that on the coin? Take a second. Look at it carefully. Think about who this probably is. Now, a lot of people may have the idea, well, this is Julius Caesar or some other very famous ruler that you may know. But I bet you most of you don't know who it is who appears on this coin, because the person who appears on this coin is Cleopatra. That this is a Cleopatra coin. And you might be thinking, wow, did Cleopatra really look like that? And the answer is yes. The Romans were very utilitarian, and one of the most important ways in today's world that we know what Roman rulers actually look like is by studying the coins of the time period. So as you can see, this is how Cleopatra actually looked, not as we kind of idealize her by Elizabeth Taylor. I like to think that, wow, knowing Cleopatra's history, she must have had a great personality. Figures in America. So again, we do have a history of having very famous people, mostly presidents, on a lot of our coins. Let's take a look and examine the coin on the left-hand side. Some of you may be familiar with this coin. This is a commemorative half dollar, and it's the sesquicentennial coin that was minted in Philadelphia in 1926, and it was to celebrate the 150th anniversary of our nation. And there you see two people on the coin. Now, obviously, the person in the forefront is George Washington, but who is that person behind him? And actually, that person who is behind him is Calvin Coolidge. He was president of the United States at the time this coin was minted. So what's really important to us historically is when people say, oh, you have to be a dead president to appear on the coin, that's not so. Calvin Coolidge was very much alive when this coin was actually minted. But sometimes it was a little difficult to tell that President Coolidge was actually alive. He was known as Silent Cal and didn't have the most engaging personality. And so, he was an awful quiet person. There's a wonderful story about Calvin Coolidge while he was president. Supposedly, he was holding a presidential state dinner, and there was a woman next to him who was just trying to engage him in conversation all night long. And President Coolidge just flat out ignored her, wouldn't have anything to do with her. Finally, at the end of the dinner, she confessed to the president. She said, Mr. President, I have a $50 bet with a real good friend of mine that I could get you to say at least 3 words. Won't you help me? And the president looked at her and he said, you lose. On the coin on the right-hand side, this is the Roanoke commemorative coin. And you'll see a woman holding a baby. And the woman's name is Eleanor Dare. And the baby that she's holding is Virginia Dare. And what is significant about this particular coin is that Virginia Dare was supposedly the very first child born in North America of European descent. And that's one of the things that this particular commemorative coin is celebrating. We have 2 other really important figures that happen to be on commemorative coins. On the left-hand side, we see Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington appeared on his very own commemorative. But not only that, but he later on appears on another commemorative, the Washington Carver commemorative. He is one of 2 African Americans who appear on 2 United States coins. Not only does Booker T. Washington appear on 2 coins, but the other African American who appears on 2 coins is Jackie Robinson, the famous baseball player. He appears on a gold commemorative as well as a silver dollar commemorative. And on the right, we have Dolly Madison, who appears on a 1999 commemorative coin. So the idea that you just have to be a man, or that you have to be an ex-president or something like that is just not so. There are several examples that we can point to that disprove that idea. Here we see a piece of Continental Currency, and it's interesting for a whole host of reasons. First of all, you'll notice that the denomination is 1/3 of a dollar. And you'll also notice that the time that it was printed, or the date that it was printed, is February 17th, 1776. So this was during the time period when the United States is trying to break away during the Revolution. There are a couple of interesting things about this note. One is that you'll notice the serial number is in red, and that the signature looks to be real and not printed. And that's true in both cases. The person who is responsible for signing these notes and the number at the top, the serial number, were hand done. And so you can imagine how time consuming that must have been. What I find interesting too is about the design of the note. You'll see that on the left hand side there's a sundial, and it says underneath of that, "Mind your business." And really, this doesn't talk about, as we would use that phrase today, where somebody is asking or being nosy, and you say, "You need to mind your business." This actually means that to be successful in life, that you need to mind your business, whatever it happens to be that you're employed in. And this was taken from Poor Richard's Almanac from Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin had a knack for coming up with wonderful sayings. I think my very favorite one is, "Fish and guests smell in 3 days." And if you've ever had guests at your house that it was time for them to leave and they just stayed on and on and on, you'll know exactly what it is that he's talking about. Here is a piece of currency that was actually used during the Civil War, fractional currency. And this is a 10-cent piece. And what's particularly interesting about this piece is the fact that George Washington appears on it. George Washington made it very known while he was president that he thought it was not a good idea to appear on currency, for him to appear on currency. And we believe that the reason he thought that is because his counterpart over in England, George III, appeared on all the currency there. And so to keep from people thinking that he wished to be a monarch or king, that he did not want to appear on currency. And the United States honored his wish until we got to the Civil War. This is the very first federal piece in which he actually appears. And if you look carefully at the image of George, you'll notice that he doesn't appear too happy. And maybe it's because he appears on money and he didn't want to. But perhaps it's because of his ill-fitting dentures. The story that he had wooden teeth is really an old wives' tale. George did not have wooden teeth. He did have dentures, and they were made out of human teeth and animal teeth. And they were extremely uncomfortable because they were the bottom plate and the top plate were attached by these massive springs that were in the back. And so when he put his dentures in, there were these massive springs that were probably pinching up against his cheeks, which had to be uncomfortable. And he really had to make an effort to keep his mouth closed and his gums together, because when he relaxed them, that's how the springs worked, and the dentures were able to open up. Many people wonder, well, didn't George take care of his teeth? Didn't he brush his teeth? Why would he have to have had false teeth? And the answer is that we know that he did take care of his teeth as best he could. There are toothbrushes that belong to him that are in existence, he and his wife Martha. But George had one very nasty habit, and that was he liked to crack walnuts in his mouth. And because walnuts are extremely hard, they cracked his teeth, so that by the time he became president of the United States, he literally had one tooth in his head. And the gentleman who was responsible for making dentures for George Washington actually left a hole in the bottom plate so that that's where his one tooth that remained could come through. Here's an example of a coin that came into existence strictly because our involvement into World War II. And this is the 1943 steel cent. Uh, the reason that this coin was made out of steel is because during the Second World War, the United States really needed to conserve as much copper as it possibly could to use for artillery shells. And so they came up with this idea of let's produce our coins principally, our cents, principally out of steel. And so they did. These were not, they made over 1 billion of 1943 steel cents. And they were not particularly popular because they tended to corrode rather easily. And actually, when the Navy encountered these steel cents, uh, they were not popular at all. And the government actually had many steel cents dropped into the ocean because they were so unpopular. The problem today is that people contact us here at the ANA constantly and think that they have something really special. A lot of people think that the coins are actually made of silver, or they have heard that these are extremely valuable coins. And there are dealers out there who, bless their hearts, have made it known that they will pay $10,000 for a 1943 cent. Of course, what they won't tell you is that they're not looking for the steel cent. They're looking for the much rarer uh, copper 1943 cent. We estimate that approximately 40 copper cents were actually produced, and maybe 12 or 13 have been identified. So people who don't know that constantly contact us about these strange cents that they're encountering and are hoping that we will tell them that they're worth hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they can tell their boss that they are going to quit. And so we have to tell people constantly that that's not a wise decision, and that really they have something, depending on condition, that is anywhere from maybe a couple cents to $2. And so they're pretty crestfallen. But you would be surprised concerning the number of people who contact us about 1943 steel cents. Coins are a great way to talk about specific periods in history. You see a buffalo nickel to the left, and you see a buffalo nickel to the right. Of course, it's very different. And the one that you see to the right is called a hobo nickel. The story behind that is that during the Great Depression here in the United States, there were men who had no money and or very little. And one of the ways that they were securing money for food was if they happened to run across a nickel, they would alter it and make it a work of art. And then they would sell it to people who happened to have money. And by doing that, they were able to buy food in which to eat. Hence the name Hobo Nickel. And hobo nickels are very collectible. There are hobo nickels that were created during the Great Depression. There are hobo nickels that are created today. And people prize them for their historical interest, but they also prize them for their artistry. And there are several different ways in which people are able to create hobo nickels. And oftentimes you can identify who the artist is by the type of nickel that they have produced. Numismatics is a great way to study inflation. Here we have a piece of German currency. And this currency, it was dated 1923. This was only a few years after the First World War. And if you can see the note clearly, you'll see that it has an extremely high denomination. I think it's listed as 100,000 marks. And the reason it had such a high denomination is that Germany was involved in paying reparations for the First World War. And they had to pay the reparations in gold. And because of that, that left very little for them to value their everyday money that people used in Germany. And so there was this period called hyperinflation, where hyperinflation really ran rampant. And because marks became the value of a mark was reduced so severely that the only way that people were be able to conduct business was to increase the number of marks that were on coins or in paper money. Here we can see a gentleman who is actually taking these hyperinflationary notes and using them as wallpaper because it was cheaper to use them as wallpaper than to actually pay for wallpaper itself. Here we can see workers who have baskets, and what they're doing is they're getting paid, and the hyperinflationary notes are going to be dumped into their baskets. And often workers, if you were fortunate enough to have a job during this horrible time in Germany, you were paid twice a day, and you were paid in these baskets. You were paid right before lunch, and you were paid at the end of the day. And instead of eating lunch, a lot of these workers would go to the store to see if there was anything left. Usually it was picked over, see if there was anything left at the stores that they could purchase and bring it home. There's two really interesting stories. I don't know how real they are, but there's two really interesting stories that I have heard. Here you can see children playing with the notes. They're cutting them up and pasting on them and whatnot. But the two stories that I've heard, there's one gentleman who happened to be in a coffee shop, and he ordered a cup of coffee, and the waitress told him that it was 30 marks. And so he drank his cup of coffee, and he decided that he would like a second cup. So he flagged down the waitress, and she brought him a second cup, and then she brought his bill. And the bill was for 65 marks. And he said, wait a minute, I don't quite understand. You told me that the coffee was 30 marks, and I had 2 cups. That should be 60 marks. And she said, well, the problem is that the inflation rate went up 5 marks in between your first and second cup. The favorite story that I have is that there's supposedly an old woman who had a wheelbarrow full of this hyperinflationary money that, and she wanted to go to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread with it. And she gets to the bakery, and the front door is rather thin, and there's no way that she can fit the wheelbarrow through to pay for the loaf of bread. So she goes into the baker and tells him what she wants, and both she and the baker come back outside with the loaf of bread, and the money's still there, but the wheelbarrow is gone. Here we can see a woman who is actually using this hyperinflationary currency for fuel. Again, just like with wallpaper, it was cheaper to burn this for fuel than it was to actually try to buy wood or coal to keep the furnace going. As you can imagine, because these notes are very large, high denominations, and they happen to be very colorful, that hyperinflationary money has become quite collectible today. And sometimes I'll get people who call me and they have these hyperinflationary marks, and they want to know if they can go to the airport and exchange them, these German marks, for United States dollars. And again, I have to tell them that they're out of luck, that these are not valued anymore in Germany as a piece of exchange, and so they wouldn't get anything for them. But that they are collectible, and they tell a really neat story. Our economy and precious metals. You know, I bet if you walk down the street today, you ask 10 people, what is it that gives our money value? How do we know it's actually worth something? And I bet that a majority of those 10 people would allude to something to the fact that they would say, well, you know, we have this gold in Kentucky, and that gold represents, that's what backs up our currency at Fort Knox. And that is not the correct answer. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone who works at Fort Knox not that long ago, and he estimated that the value of gold at Fort Knox would only cover a little less than half of the money that is currently out there. So then the question is, what is it that backs our money and makes it valuable? Well, at one time, our money was valued by precious metals. And you can see two examples of that. On the left-hand side, you'll see a $100 note that is called a gold certificate. So if you had one of these, you could go to one of the Federal Reserve banks and you could exchange this for $100 worth of gold. 10 $10 gold pieces or five $20 gold pieces, what have you. And you can do that. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a silver dollar. Now, this coin is a peace dollar, and it was actually made out of 90% silver. And just like with gold certificates, there were silver certificates. And if you went to one of the Federal Reserve banks, that you could exchange the silver certificate for one of these dollars, because we were on a precious metal standard at that time. We are no longer on that. Our money is what is called fiat money, which means it's representative, which means that the coins that you have really aren't worth the value that they're intended. Although you can make a case for cents, for example. Actually, the metal that is in a cent is probably worth more, and it's certainly the mint in creating cents. It costs more to make than they are of value. But still, our money is fiat money. It is representative today. It is not backed by precious metals. So if that's the case, then the question comes up, well, why does our money have value? And that's an interesting question. And I happened to be at the Federal Reserve one day, and I was talking with some Federal Reserve officials, and I asked them that question. I said, what is it that exactly, what can we put our finger on exactly that allows our money to have value? They really had trouble answering that question. And so we spent a little bit of time talking to them about it. And the answer that I came up with, and it seemed to satisfy their requirements, is that our money has value today because the federal government accepts it in payment for taxes. So, for example, if tomorrow there were headlines in the newspaper and the federal government said, those green pieces of paper that you guys have, we're not going to accept them in payment for taxes anymore. Instead, we're going to accept, shoelaces. Well, the value of shoelaces would skyrocket, and the money that we use today would be virtually worthless. And that's the kind of the idea that they come up with, and they couldn't dispute that. So it's an interesting concept about why our money holds value today. Talking about value, and we're talking about coin collecting, it's important that you understand that old does not mean rare or valuable. And that's such an important concept that we have to drive home with folks who are newly involved in coin collecting. And if you don't believe me, if you attend a coin show, see if you can find a section of dealers who deal in ancient coins. And if they have ancient Roman bronze coins, like the ones that you see in this image, you'll find out that you can buy some of them for very little money. And these are coins that are well over 1,000 years old. So age is not a determinant in what can be valuable. Coins are not furniture, and so how old they are is really immaterial. As a matter of fact, I would like to suggest that the history behind a coin can be very important. Sometimes more important than how valuable it is. Let me show you what I mean. So here we have two images. On the left-hand side, we have an image of a 1912 Liberty Head nickel. Okay. Now, 1912 Liberty Head nickels are not an extremely valuable coin. There are probably very few dealers who huddle up to one another at a coin show and talk about the value of a 1912 Liberty Head nickel because they are of fairly modest value. But imagine for a second that that 1912 Liberty Head nickel that you see actually sailed on the Titanic. That someone who was a passenger on the Titanic had that particular coin. Well, that would be great historical interest, and that would make the coin um, extremely interesting. So my suggestion to you is this: that sometimes that the history behind a coin is really more important than the value. And then you may be saying, well, but Rod, how could you prove that that particular coin was on the Titanic? And my answer is that you can't. Although there are examples of coins that were taken out of the pockets of people who did not survive the Titanic and were kept. But in this instance, while I can't prove that this particular coin that you see was with someone on the Titanic, there's no way that you can say absolutely that it was not with someone who was on that. And so, I like to think that coins such as these really have interesting stories to tell. So, if we talk about how coins that are old really are not necessarily valuable, and if we have of the idea that often coins are more interesting in the story that they tell rather than their value, their retail value, what does, as numismatists, give our coins value? And that's a great question. And really, there are three variables that determine the value of a coin. And one is mintage number, how many coins were actually minted of that coin in a particular year and at a particular mint. The state of preservation, or the grade of a coin, also helps in its value. And really, the third determiner or third variable for the value of a coin is demand. There are certain coins that are always in high demand. There are certain coins which we call sleepers who are rarely, if ever, in demand. And then there are coins that sort of go up and down in value and sort of a cyclical way. Grading is really a shorthand language for how we determine the state of preservation. It helps collectors communicate. It establishes a common language. Grading is more an art than a science. It's very subjective, even though it is based on standard guidelines. Grading is a learned skill, and there are professional grading services out there to help you if you choose not to grade coins on your own. Although I would tell you that I certainly believe that every one of us have the ability and talent to be able to at least grade the coins in our own collection. And I'm not saying you should never use professional grading services. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that I think that it's important for every coin collector to learn how to grade, because you're not getting the most out of the hobby until you do. So here's an example of two coins. We have two Morgan dollars, and on the left-hand side, we have a mint state Morgan dollar that is an MS-67. We're using the Sheldon grading scale here, which goes from 1 to 70. So this mint state coin at MS-67 is a very nice coin, has very few detractors on it. And on the right-hand side, we have a silver dollar that we consider a fine, or F12. Now, obviously, looking at these two coins, you can tell the difference right away between the two of them. And if I asked you to pick out which one was mint state or which one to pick out fine, you could do that without any problem right away. The problem arises when we look at these two coins. Again, on the left-hand side, we have a mint state 67. But on the right-hand side, we have a mint state 65. Now, the difference between the two is very small. But to someone who is trained in grading, they are there and they are apparent. If we can imagine just for a moment that these coins are the same date and from the same mint mark, it's a possibility that these coins, the difference in value based on their grades, could be tens of thousands of dollars. So it's important for everyone to have a grounding in being able to grade. So if for nothing else, when you buy and sell coins on your own, that you have an idea of state of preservation, what you know to be true on a particular grade of coin. Counterfeits. Here we have a counterfeit $1804, and this was an actual image that was sent to me by a gentleman who really believed that he had an $1804, and of course I could tell him easily that this was a counterfeit, a very poor one at that. On the right-hand side, we see $100,000 certificate. $100,000 certificates actually did exist. They were not created for the public use, however. They were created to make large transfers from one Federal Reserve Bank to another. And all of them, they were only made in 1 year, 1934. And after they served their purpose, they were all returned to the Federal Reserve Bank. The vast majority of them were destroyed, except for a few pieces that the Federal Reserve, not the Federal Reserve, but the Bureau of Engraving and Printing kept around to be able to show. But there are none that are available to collectors, and even if there were, they would be illegal to hold. We get calls all the time about $1804 and $100 certificates. And we have to tell the people that, you have something that is counterfeit. And they say, well, you're not even looking hard at the note or the coin. How can you tell that? Well, we know that there are 15 $1804, and we know where they are. And we know that the $100 certificates were submitted back and destroyed. And so there's no available one out there. And even if there was, and you were a collector, men in black suits would come and take it away from you. Cleaning. When thinking about cleaning your coins, just say no. Don't do it. I know that you may be tempted, but don't do it. Because if you do, more than likely, you're going to destroy the value of the coin. And you might say to yourself, well, if I just clean it a little bit, that probably no one would ever notice. Well, that's just not true. Trained numismatists can spot a clean coin a mile away. And we like to have the coins in their original skin, as we call it. And so if you clean it, it's taking that away. A lot of people say, well, it looks better that way. Well, most people clean coins because they have a very worn, dirty coin. So if you clean a very worn, dirty coin, what do you now have? Well, you have a very worn, shiny coin. And there's a difference between shininess and luster. And so it brings, a cleaning can bring a very false appearance to a coin if you clean it. Now, are there people who clean coins for a living to improve their value? Yes, there are. But they're very few and far between. And for ham and eggers like you and I, the official stance of the ANA is to just do not do it. Do not clean your coins. The last thing I want to talk with you about is that numismatics is a hobby. What do we mean by that? We mean that it's something by definition that we do for fun. If you go to a coin show, you'll notice that there are so many people around who are so serious or have scowls looking on their face. And I feel sorry for these people. Now, I'm not talking about dealers. It's their livelihood. I'm talking about people who are just doing it as a hobby. Because our lives are so problematic that why would we spend our free time doing something that stresses us out? So, my important message to you is that please remember that it is a hobby, that it's not something that you're life or death, and that you're doing it for fun. And if you keep those things in mind, chances are you will have fun and enjoy the hobby. Okay, I think we have about 10 minutes left. Yes, we do. And I'll be happy to take any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Doesn't mean I'll have the answer, but I'll do my best to answer them should you have any. Brianna?
Yeah, thank you, Rod. I'm going to go ahead and launch the survey really quick. So while you're listening to these questions, and as you input your questions, please fill out the survey. It's only 8 questions. All right, so one came in at the very, very beginning, so we'll just start from there.
Okay.
I think silver will go up as the dollar tanks.
The silver go up as the dollar tanks. It can, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Silver has a lot of different uses out there in the world. And so, really, I will say that silver goes up as the confidence in the value of a dollar lessens. So it is tied to the dollar directly, but there are plenty of circumstances where the strength of the dollar may vary, and it has very little to no effect on silver. I will say that I get a lot of people who, when they find out what I do for a living, talk to me about how they're very worried that at some point dollars will be useless, and they want to collect silver or gold. And what I tell those people is, if you're that concerned that there will ever come a time when our dollars have absolutely no value, maybe you ought to start collecting cans of food rather than gold or silver. Because if it gets that bad out there, that the cans of food are really your safest bet instead of actual gold or silver. Um, there is a difference between people who who get silver as investors, and people who collect silver coins because they are collectible. And so it's important to understand that difference. And there's nothing wrong with being an investor. If you happen to gather silver because that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. But I would suggest to you that there is a difference between people who invest or gather silver or gold and those of us who actually collect it.
All right, your next question. The BEP prints stamps, so why are they not considered part of numismatics?
The BEP prints stamps?
Yeah, that's what this question says. The BEP prints stamps, so why are they not considered part of numismatics?
Oh, so I think because people who collect stamps are known as philatelists, and that sounds like a horrible name. Um, it's just, and you're right. Actually, there was a point in time during the Civil War where we have encased postage stamps that was actually used for money. It's just that that stamp collectors sort of have their own group of people, and coin collectors do as well. It's not a question of never the twain shall meet. I've been into a lot of shops, at coin shops, where you have dealers who deal in coins and have stamps sort of as a sideline. But I'll tell you, from my own response is that there's so much to learn in numismatics, and there's so much to learn in collecting stamps, that I personally would have a very difficult time learning the intricacies of both.
It says, how were yapstones actually used as money? How were they transferred from one owner to another?
Great question. So yapstones actually didn't. If you have a very large yapstone, if you had a very large yapstone, and some of the yapstones would be 12 feet in circumference, huge, they would stay where they were, and there would be sort of a gathering where it was made known to the inhabitants of the island that that particular stone was transferring from one owner to another, even though the stone itself stayed in the same place. That's how it actually happened, and that's a really good question. Um, and you can sort of think of yapstones as a store of wealth, and as a way of showing that you happen to do very well for yourself. I often tell people having a yapstone in front of your house was sort of the same thing as having a BMW in front of your house. It just would show people that you had done well in life. But the point you bring up is an important one. Just because it appears in front of one house, that yapstone may not, the current owner of that yapstone may not be the person who lives at that house. They did own it at one time, but they may not currently be the owner. Great question.
All right. Will the design of American coins and paper money ever include allegorical figures again? Why or why not?
Of course, I can't speak about the future, what will happen. The only comment that I can make is that in our circulating money, I'm not talking about commemorative money, I'm talking about our business strikes. I believe that the people out there are very reluctant to have our money changed. I think that if our money changes in appearance, for some reason they tie that to that it being worth less than the original money that they had encountered before. It just seems that in our society, we're really reluctant to change the way our money appears. So with that being said, while I can't look into the future and saying that, that there will be the Lady Liberty will come back or other allegorical figures. I will say that they would have to jump through several hoops to get to that point.
All right, so this one is a little lengthy, so I'll try and read it to you. I have a complete set of OPA tokens, 1944 holder that holds the red and blue World War II tokens. Only 50 of these holders are made and few known that have been completed. They are all uncirculated. How do you get a value, or do you give it to a museum?
That's a really interesting question. There are token societies, and there is also metal societies. And what I would do in that situation is I would track them down and see if there are people specialists in in those organizations who would be of help to you. The other thing that I can say is that the library here at the ANA is currently not open due to the pandemic. But in the future, you might want to access the library and see what you can find here. You can do that now, even though the library itself isn't open. If you go into our website and go to the library section, we have a live library catalog. So you can go in there and see if there's anything that addresses your particular subject. If not, I would definitely contact the Token and Metal Society and see if they have a recommendation of someone who could be of help to you.
Again, if you haven't finished the survey, please go ahead, do so. Rod, your next question. How were the few copper 1943 cent produced when most were steel? Did they place copper into the die?
Yeah, so what happened was, there has to be a definitive moment when the steel blanks are now going to be used. And so what happened was that there were some remaining copper blanks in the presses that were accessed and minted, and then and then they were followed by the steel cents. You've got to remember that this was in 1943. And the popularity of coin collecting was not nearly as popular as it would be today. And so while the mint workers probably knew this, it didn't dawn on them that they were creating rarities. It's important to understand that the people who work at the mints are generally not coin collectors. They really couldn't care less about the term of numismatics. They are producing a product. They produce it very well. They produce it on a consistent basis, but they're not coin collectors. So to them, the idea of having a few spare copper blanks that were going to be minted before the transition over to the steel cents, it probably was not that big a deal to them.
All right, here's another one that's a little bit longer. If grading is based on standard guidelines, then why does it seem that in many cases what used to be an MS63 is now an MS65? Unless the standards change, in which case, what is the purpose of having standards? Why are coins being graded more loosely than times past?
Wow, so there are several questions there. First of all, it's important to understand that there are different grading standards. First, let me explain that. There is the ANA grading standards. There are also grading standards that are employed by NGC, for example, and PCGS. I'm not here to debate which ones are correct and which ones are not. I can tell you that the grading standards from NGC and PCGS got their start with the grading standards at the ANA, but over time they have morphed into grading standards that they're more comfortable with. So the first thing you have to do is you have to kind of look at what is your baseline. Is it the grading standards of NGC? Is it the grading standards of PCGS? Or is it the grading standards of the ANA? I will also tell you that the third-party grading companies, when we're talking about, especially about mint state coins, they are they're employing market grading, which means that they are really grading the coin concerning how valuable it is, how much it would sell for, with less an eye on the technical grading aspects of it. If you were to talk to Bill Fiva, who is part of the ANA, he's an icon, been in the hobby for a long time, and he would tell you that the third-party grading companies value coins, that they really don't grade them, and he's in the ANA Hall of Fame. But to answer your question more directly, grading standards do change over time, and for a lot of reasons. There are purists of us out there who like to keep the standards as best we can. I will say that technical grading standards, okay, coins that, and usually technical grading standards are employed with coins that have circulated. Technical grading standards have remained pretty standard over the year. I think the fluctuation really deals with market grading standards. And I would say that because, the price of coins that are mint state can rise or fall dramatically. It also has to deal with the composition of the coin themselves. So, for example, gold coins, gold is an extremely malleable soft metal. And so graders often give gold a little bit of a break because it's so easy for wear or marks to occur on that coin, as opposed to a coin that represents the hardest of the metals that we use, which would be nickel. So what I would suggest to you, that a scratch that you would find on a nickel would require much more force than it would on a gold coin. So I know that that's not giving you a definitive answer, but those are some of the considerations that you need to think about when you're thinking about how grading has changed over the years.
Is there a general standard of how much value is added to a coin that is graded versus one that's not?
So I'm assuming that you're talking about third-party grading with that. I'm going to make that assumption. And I think it's fair to say that generally coins that have been encapsulated and graded tend to be more liquid than coins that have not been. And I want to go back to what I was saying earlier about learning how to grade. When I go to a coin show, I like to look at coins that are what we call raw, that have not been graded by a third-party grading company. And the reason I like to do that is because I like to practice with my grading abilities. But also, you have to consider that when a coin dealer is selling you a coin that was graded by a third-party grading company, there is some idea that that coin is safer than one that happens to be raw. And in most instances, that's true, but you're going to pay for that because you're going to at least pay for the cost of having that coin graded by a third-party grading company.
All right, Rod, do you want to do 2 more questions?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see here. Do you know any good coin shops online?
So, great question. If you go to our website, on our homepage, money.org, you will see at the very top of the page, it says locate a dealer. And if you click on that page and follow the progression, what you will be able to do is you will be able to find dealers in your general area who are who are members of the ANA. What does that mean? What that means is that they are members in good standing of the ANA and agreed by our code of ethics. Now, does that mean that they're the most friendly, wonderful people in the world? No. But what it does mean is that they agree to deal with people squarely. So my answer to you would be, go to our webpage, our homepage, click on Locate a Dealer, follow the directives, and you will be able to find, hopefully, dealers that are close to you who will be able to deal with you in a square way.
All right, last question. What's the best way to start coin collecting?
So I think often people come up to me all the time and they say, I've just started collecting coins, Rod. And I've started out by putting together a set of Morgan dollars. And when people tell me that, I sort of cringe on the inside because Morgan dollars are an extremely long set. They're beautiful coins, but they're extremely long and expensive set. And usually people who are just getting into the hobby don't have the experience or, quite frankly, the funds to be able to complete a Morgan dollar series. And so what I suggest to people who are just starting out in the hobby is to choose a series that you can accomplish, where you can complete it, and then you'll get that series of you'll get that feeling of accomplishment. And choose a series, at least initially, where there's not a tremendous amount of financial outlay. What are examples of that? Jefferson nickels are a wonderful place to start a collection because you can still get a significant amount of Jefferson nickels, older Jefferson nickels that you'll find in change. And there's really no huge Jefferson nickel out there that you're going to have to break the bank on. Eisenhower dollars are another example. If you want something that has a precious metal content, Franklin halves. You can assemble they won't be mint state, but you can assemble a Franklin half dollar series of very nice looking coins for under $400. And then once you have that sense of accomplishment and you feel better about the coins that you're attracted to, and you have a better idea of grading, then at that point that you can move on to a more difficult series. But my advice is, don't start with a very difficult series as the very first set of coins you're collecting. Morgan dollars, Liberty Walking half dollars. These are examples of coins that you probably want to stay away from, at least initially, if you plan on completing a series, until you've gained more experience. I often tell people that the road to numismatics is littered with people who have started collecting Morgan dollars, who have gotten discouraged and who have left the hobby. And I don't want to see you be one of them.
Awesome. Well, I know there's a lot of questions we didn't get to. Rod, is there a way for somebody to contact you if they have a follow-up question?
Thank you, Brianna. So if you do have a follow-up question, you can contact me by email at Gillis, Gillis, at money.org. And I'll do my best to answer your question as quickly as I possibly can. It really depends on the number of questions we get. But if you email me, Gillis at money.org, I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as I can.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Rod, for this great presentation. We did record this presentation and we'll put it on our website in the next week or so. So again, if you have any other questions for Rod, please feel free to shoot him an email, and you can find all the other recordings as well as our future classes on our website as well. Thanks everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Brianna.
Thanks, Rod. Have a good one.